guys, welcome to this week's video. Now this week's video will be a bit different because today we are going to talk about local taxation. Our outline of discussion will include source and power to create revenues, nature of local taxing power, fundamental principles of local taxation, and local government structure. Without further ado, let us start with our first subtopic, which is about the sources and power to create revenues. Let us start with the question, is taxation an inherent power? The answer is yes. Taxation is an inherent power. Now, we learned in our Tax 1 that the mere existence of a state comes with inherent powers. These powers include taxation, eminent domain, and police power. Here, no laws or provisions are needed by the Constitution so that the state can exercise these powers, including the power to tax. However, why is there provisions in our Constitution pertaining to the power of taxation? Well, the answer is simple. These provisions pertaining to power of taxation are actually not grants of power. Rather, these are limitations on the power of the state to tax. These provisions provide guidelines as to how the Constitution can exercise its power of taxation. Now that we know the inherent powers of the state and why there are provisions pertaining to taxation, let us now move on to the local government units, or the LGUs. So, with respect to the LGUs, is their exercise of the power of taxation an inherent power? The answer is no. The local government has no inherent power to tax. So, a little history, guys. Before, the power of the LGUs to tax is actually a delegated authority by the Congress. But with the 1987 Constitution, the power of the LGUs to tax is not just a delegated authority, but a direct grant by the Constitution. So this direct grant of the Constitution can be read in Section 5, Article 10 of the 1987 Constitution. Now, let me highlight that the LGU's power of taxation is actually subject to the guidelines and limitations provided by the Congress. So the question now is, how does the Congress provide guidelines and limitations to LGU's power to tax? Well, this is through the law, based on the following. We have the Section 3, Article 10 of the 1987 Constitution, along with the Local Government Code and the Local Tax Ordinance. First, let us talk about the Section 3 of Article 10 under the 1987 Constitution. So you can read the entire article, but basically, what is stated here is that the Congress shall enact a local government code which will provide guidelines and limitations on the LGU's power to tax. What is the result of the Section 3, Article 10 is that the Congress shall enact a local government code, and the local government code will provide the guidelines and limitations on the LGU's power to tax. Now the question is, by virtue of the local government code providing guidelines and limitations as to the LGU's power to tax, can LGUs now impose taxes? The answer, no. Even with the local government code, the LGUs still cannot impose taxes unless they enact their own local tax ordinance. Despite the enactment of the local government code, the LGUs can only impose taxes upon their enactment of a local tax ordinance. Let me clarify that the local government code provides the guidelines and the limitations, but the basis of the LGUs to impose taxes, fees, and charges are actually because of the local tax ordinance. However, it is also important to note that the local government units must always yield to the local government code because this is a legislative act which is superior, having been passed by the Congress itself. Thus, such power must be imposed within the limitations of the local government code, such as it can only be exercised through a valid ordinance, as what we have discussed earlier. Second, it must be subject to common limitations enumerated under Section 133. Third, it must not exceed the rates provided under the local government code, except their authority to adjust the same under Section 191 once every 5 years. Now I will hand you over to the next reporter to discuss about the nature of the local taxing power.
This time, let us proceed to the nature of the local taxing power of the aforementioned local government, wherein it includes the following 4 aspects: So the following are namely the power to impose or levy tax, fee, or charge. Second, the power to grant tax exemption. Third, the power to adjust local tax rates. And fourth, the power to prescribe penalties for tax violations. However, to be more specific, let us start first with the first one, which is the power to impose or levy tax, fee, or charge. This is being exercised by the respective sanggunian of every LGU, which are the sangguniang panglungsod, pangbayan, and pangbarangay. Sanggunian serves as the legislative department that creates ordinance of local applications. By way of analogy, this is the Congress of National Government. Second, the power to grant tax exemption. The imposition of fee and charge must be done through an ordinance. That is why this power to grant tax exemption must be through an ordinance. It must not only be through an executive order, directive letter, or a resolution.
I will be continuing the report on the nature of the local taxing power of the local government. So the third part is the power to adjust the local tax rates. The LGUs have the authority to adjust our local tax rates. However, there are three limitations that must be noted in order to exercise this power. First is that the adjustment is only limited to once for every 5 years. Another is that the adjustment shall be in no case exceeding 10% of the rate fixed under the local government code. And also, the adjustment of tax rate should be through an ordinance again. Lastly is the power to prescribe penalties for tax violations. In order to ensure compliance of the local government code, we have the prescribed penalties and fines for the violations. For province and municipalities, they can impose a fine of no less than 1,000 nor more than 5,000, or imprisonment of no less than 1 month nor more than 6 months. It can be imposed together or simultaneously, depending on the discretion of this court. Yet with respect to the barangay, they can impose a lesser fine of not less than 100 pesos and not more than 1,000 pesos. So the range is between 100 pesos to 1,000, while the other LGUs can impose a fine of 1,000 to 5,000 pesos with imprisonment. However, we should remember that the barangay cannot enact an ordinance that imposes the penalty of imprisonment for each violation. Hence, the barangay does not have that power. So now I will be handing you over to our next set of reporters who will be talking about the fundamental principles of local taxation.
So moving on to the fundamental principles of local taxation. Now that we know that there is this power to create their own source of revenue, meaning the local government units may assess or collect not only taxes but also fees and charges and other impositions. Thus, it is very important also for us to know the fundamental principles that shall govern the local government units in exercising these power. And actually, there are 5. 1. Taxation shall be uniform in each local government unit. Do you still remember what uniformity means? Recalling to the basic or general principles of state taxation, a tax is uniform within the constitutional requirement when it operates with the same force and effect in every place where the subject of it is found. Uniformity as applied to the constitutional provision that all taxes shall be uniform means that all property belonging to the same class shall be taxed alike. So going back, if our national revenue code require uniformity of tax system within the national level, then it will also be important that in the local government level, taxation shall also be uniform. 2. Taxes, fees, charges, and other impositions shall A. Be equitable and based as far as practicable on the taxpayer's ability to pay. This one is very important because if you remember the 3 basic tenets to achieving a sound tax system, the FAT, wherein F for fiscal adequacy, A for administrative feasibility, and T for theoretical justice, wherein among the three, theoretical justice is a principle which relates to this one. In this principle, it dictates that the tax laws shall be equitable. They should be based on the taxpayer's ability to pay. Those who have more should be taxed more. B. Be levied and collected only for public purposes. Taxes are exacted only for a public purpose. They cannot be used for purely private purposes or for the exclusive benefit of private persons. It would be a robbery for the state to tax its citizens and use the funds generated for a private purpose. C. Not be unjust, excessive, oppressive, or confiscatory. It is evident that local government units may impose fees and charges provided that it is reasonable. The Local Government Code was enacted not just to amplify the power of local government to create their own sources of revenue, but also to ensure that taxpayers will not be overburdened or saddled with multiple and unreasonable impositions. And lastly, letter D. Not be contrary to law, public policy, national economic policy, or in the restraint of trade. Any impositions shall abide and be in accordance to the statutory guidelines provided by the Congress. And now allow me to hand you over to the next reporter to discuss the three remaining fundamental principles to you.
The government requires funding, but the trick is, it is to carefully select both the tax base and the tax rate. The government must also create a mechanism or a policy for tax compliance that won't discourage the taxpayers from participating. To continue the discussion of the fundamental principle of local taxation, the collection of local taxes, fees, charges, and other imposition shall in no case be let to any private person. In this case, the National Internal Revenue Code and the Local Government Code differs in terms of collecting taxes. This leads us to a question: how do the National Internal Revenue Code and the Local Government Code differ in collecting taxes? In the National Internal Revenue Code, the national government authorizes and delegates its power to agent banks, which are private persons, to collect taxes on behalf of the government. On the other hand, the local government can only collect local taxes through the local government treasuries. For instance, the barangay treasurer, municipal treasurer, city treasurer, and the provincial treasurer. Once again, local taxes can only be collected by the local government treasuries. Next fundamental principle is the revenue collected pursuant to the provision of this code shall ensure solely to the benefit of and be subjected to disposition by the local government unit levying the tax, fee, charge, or other imposition unless otherwise specifically provided herein. This will directly lead us to the main idea of why the government is imposing taxes. Taxes collected by the local government should benefit the welfare of the public. On to the last fundamental principle of local taxation: each local government unit shall, as far as practicable, evolve a progressive system of taxation. Now the question that formulates into our minds: what is a progressive system of taxation? This idea will support one of the theories of cost allocation and taxation, which is the ability to pay theory. This fundamental principle is imposed in order to minimize the tax burden of the people with lower ability to pay. Consequently, people with higher income will be taxed more. Now, I will hand you over to the next reporter to discuss about the local government structure.
Now, let's proceed to the last subtopic, which is the local government structure. The national government is subdivided into different levels: province, municipality, and barangay. Each province is further subdivided into municipalities, and then each municipality are further subdivided into different barangays. Each of these are what we called local government units. Now question, how about the city? A municipality that is growing can be converted into a city. Therefore, the municipality will become a city if it meets the standards for cityhood, which are based on population, landmass, and income. Because income often rises along with population size, city must be independent from the province. However, there are different types of city. We have component city, independent component city, and highly urbanized city. Our traditional concept is that a city is independent if it is highly urbanized, but a new law provides a new concept of an independent and component city, which is why there is a distinction between the two. While the component city is a part of the component province, independent component cities and highly urbanized cities are typically independent on the mother province. To further understand the structure of local government units, we have to know their differences. Firstly, the province. In the Philippines, provinces, which is called lalawigan in Filipino, are one of its primary political and administrative divisions. There are 81 provinces at present, which are further subdivided into component cities and municipalities. Next is the municipalities, which include cities, villages, and boroughs. It provides services such as police and fire protection, parks and recreation, streets and sewers, among others. The city, on the other hand, is a unit of government that has certain rights and responsibilities to its citizens. Cities collect taxes, make contracts, provide services, and make law of ordinances for the health, safety, and well-being of its residents. Lastly is the barangay. It is the smallest administrative or local government unit in province or independent city. As the basic political unit, the barangay serves as the primary planning and implementing unit of government programs, basic services, projects, and activities, and is a forum in which the collective views of the people in the community may be crystallized and considered. Local governments may levy taxes, fees, and charges in accordance with the guidelines and limitations set by Congress and only within the boundaries of their respective territorial jurisdictions. For those local government under the autonomous regions, their taxing power are limited and bound by their enabling law.
And that's it for this week's video. In behalf of my team, we hope that you learned a thing or two. See you in our next video.